Hey everyone, Crypto Millionaire here with another video. Today I want to talk about what happened to me last week at the bank. Now, I was basically in there for 5 hours trying to convince them that I was not a drug trafficker or money launderer. Basically, that was it, or a terrorist for that matter. It was a very interesting experience. What happened basically was that I went into a bank, one of the biggest banks here in Japan, and asked them to make an account. And they asked me a few questions like, do you have a bank account in another bank? I said, yeah, I do. And they go, basically, well, why don't you use that bank instead? And I said, well, I want to make a bank account at your bank because it's the biggest bank. And lo and behold, they came up with so many excuses not to let me have a bank account. Now, this is like really interesting because I knew from a long time ago that the Fed is now giving money basically free to banks. So the banks don't really want your money. Okay, even if you put a bank account, make a bank account, put your money in there, do a time certificate for say a year or whatever period it is, they're not really happy to have your money. Basically, the reason for that is because they can get as much money as they can from the Fed and the central bank of whatever country they have. So I was really shocked actually. It took me like 2 hours just to get the application done. And so basically what happened was I went to the bank's foreign exchange department. I said, I want to send money overseas. And they asked me, do you have a bank account? And I said, no, I'm going to make one from now so that I can send from your bank. And they said, well, if you don't have a bank account, then I want to ask you some questions. And basically what they asked was, what is the money for? What is the transfer purpose, etc., etc. And I told them that, well, I do a business selling educational packages, basically. And they came back and they said, well, we're going to need all these different documents when you send the money. I said, that's fine. We can, get all those documents, contracts, agreements, stuff like that. No problem. But then they said, well, do you have a bank account in another bank? And I said, yeah. And I said, they asked, do you send money from that bank? And they said, basically, they asked if I sent money from the other bank. And I said, yeah. And they said, why aren't you being able to send money from the other bank? And I said, well, we had some issues about their service. I didn't like their attitude. They weren't very friendly, etc., etc. Also very unprofessional. And I explained that. But when it came down to actually getting the bank account, they were kind of like, well, I'm not sure if you can get a bank account here. And I said, well, okay, anyway, I'm just going to make a regular bank account and then come back later and then try and send money through your bank. Is that okay? And they said, it's okay. So I went downstairs to the main area where they do bank applications. So I had all the documents, identification ready to make that. So I get there and the lady at the counter, before I get to the main counters, asked me a lot of questions, like what is this bank account for, etc., etc. And I explained to her, I never had this happen to me before in Japan, where it's so difficult to make a bank account. I mean, they're asking me so many different questions, and they're asking me again, do you have bank accounts in other banks? And I'm like, yeah, but I want to have more bank accounts because you guys don't guarantee savings over $100,000 or 10 million yen, basically. So I was there talking to the lady at the reception, and it took another 5 minutes. Then I finally get to the main counter where I do the application, and I'm telling her, okay, I want to make a bank account. And again, she's asking me, what is this for? I said, well, I do sales of educational packages. I need to send money overseas. And she said, oh, the main purpose is to send money overseas. I said, well, that's one of the purposes, but I also want to do my basic financing, paying for bills from my house using your bank. And she said, well, which is the real purpose? I said, both. And she's like, well, you have to only choose one. And I said, well, then just make it just regular payments for whatever, utility bills, etc., etc. And then she comes back and she says, okay, just a moment. I'm going to come back and I'm going to, process your application. Okay, and then she comes back and says, well, your bank account is a type of bank account where you're a self-proprietor or sole proprietor, and you need to have approval from upstairs. And I said, well, in the past, I've made many bank accounts, and I've never had a problem making, a bank account like that day when I make the application. But she came back and said, well, your bank account is a different type. You're a sole proprietor, and we need to go through all the processes to go through this. I said, well, okay, then forget the sole proprietors, forget about sending money overseas. I just want to make a regular bank account just to take care of bills and stuff. And she said, well, you can't change the purpose now. And I said, well, I'm going to use it for multiple things. And she said, just a moment. So she goes in the back and is talking to the manager. And the manager comes out and says, basically, we can't process your account. You can't make a bank account here. And I said, why not? And I said, well, your purpose was first to send money overseas, and now you're saying it's just for processing bills. And you can't change from, going back and forth. And I said, well, I'm in financial education. I know a lot about banks. I know about the Fed. I know you guys don't want my money. You don't really want to save my money. You want to process my money because you guys have enough money. You guys get free money from the big banks. Isn't that right? And he said, yeah, you caught me. I don't want to admit it, but right now we're not increasing the number of bank accounts in this area. We have too much fraud in the past, etc. So, well, I'm not, one of the persons that did that kind of thing. I don't care if you made bank accounts for Yakuza or whatever. That's the past. I'm just a regular businessman trying to do business here in Japan and trying to make a regular bank account so I can send money overseas. That's it. So we go back and forth, and I say, you don't want my bank money, and you know what he came back and said? He said that basically you don't need our loans because now on the internet there's crowdfunding. And I said, well, that's not the purpose of what I'm here for. I'm not here to get financing. I'm here to start a bank account and start doing business with you. As you know, banks choose who their customers are. So they're not actually wanting to make any more bank accounts in the country now. I mean, this is very strange. This is something that I never thought about. I mean, we need to talk about the non-banked people, and that's another issue that I like to talk about maybe in a future video. But this time I was just so shocked that they just didn't want my money, and that was the basic line. But in the end, well, the guy said, okay, I'll process your application, and we don't know if we're gonna get it or not. That's okay, I said, and it's going through now. But I thought I'd make a video to let you guys know what's going on in the financial world, because basically, ladies and gentlemen, the banks don't want your money. And that's the final analysis of this. And we need to be aware. A lot of things happening in our industry right now. We need to be aware, and I think it's important that we stay informed and in tune. So if you like this video, click on the like below, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. Every time I make a new video, you'll see it come out. Okay, and leave a comment, please, because I'd like to make more and better content every time we do these videos and give you more information about what's going on. So that's it for me, Crypto Millionaire. We'll see you guys later. Crypto Millionaire.